Hello friends, my name is Emile and welcome back to some more Forza Top Gear laps. Today we're taking a look at the cars of Need for Speed in the Need for Speed Special. Now I should just quickly explain before we get into this, I do appreciate most of these cars in the Need for Speed games have upgrades, you know, visual, performance, so on and so forth. However, in the interest of fairness, I've decided to keep all the cars completely stock. They are running the paint jobs that they do in the games, however the cars are running stock, so there's no visual upgrades or so on. Anyways, first up today, it's the Nissan Skyline R34, 287 horsepower, 3,417 pounds of weight. This is Eddie's car from the first Need for Speed Underground game. Anyways, 287 horsepower actually means this car is tied for the least powerful vehicle of the day. However, that's still 287 horsepower is actually relatively decent for a car going around here. It's about average. The R34 is sort of a veteran of the Top Gear track. We've had this car go around several times in several seasons, and each time it's performed admirably. And well, here today it did the same. It is a good car to drive, the R34. As far as like a car to sort of just chuck around a racetrack if you need to build something up quickly, the R34 certainly is not a bad choice. It's got four-wheel drive. It's got a relatively decent amount of power. The engine is pretty darn tunable as well. The weight, it is a little bit on the heavier side. 3,417 pounds of weight is a decent amount for this sort of vehicle. It's pretty hefty, but I mean, it's not too bad ultimately. Yeah, the R34, good car to drive, solid car to drive. Straight line speed is not particularly amazing. Again, this is mostly down to the weight and the fact that it doesn't have all that much power, but yeah, it is a solid car to drive, the R34. Yeah, I assume many of you have driven this car, so you probably already knew that. Next up, we have the Nissan 350Z, 287 horsepower, 3,310 pounds of weight. As you can see, exactly the same horsepower as the Skyline, which of course means that this is the least powerful vehicle of the day. I should mention this is Rachel's car from Need for Speed Underground 2. However, I will quickly throw this out there. All the paint jobs for this car, I had a choice of about two, and neither of them are particularly great. This one has some issues with it. I don't like the thing that it says on the back. It's got like a very weird license plate thing going on, which looks pretty bad. It isn't a great replica, but I'll take it. Anyways, 350Z, what is it like to drive? It is a bit of a meh car, to be honest with you. It isn't particularly amazing to drive. I'm not a huge fan of the 350Z all in all, sort of from a looks perspective, from my personal thoughts on it. And around the track, it is a slidey car. Unlike the R34, this does not have the benefit of four-wheel drive. It's rear-wheel drive, and it will get the rear end out. I don't know how much of that is due to the fact it's in the rain. I never really tested this car in the dry. This was sort of my first time driving this car. But overall, I just didn't find it to be particularly amazing. There are definitely better cars out there if you're sort of looking for race cars, but I mean, it's not the worst thing I've ever driven around the track, but it's just not one of my favourites. I don't think I'll be using this car again particularly. Next up, we have the BMW M3 E46, 333 horsepower, 3,415 pounds of weight. This is, of course, the players/racers car from Need for Speed Most Wanted, and it did make a slight appearance in Carbon. Anyways, the M3, of course, this is one of the most iconic Need for Speed cars, and in general, the E46 is a car which is very much liked. A lot of people say this is probably the best M3. I'm not too sure on that personally. I've never really been a huge fan of M3s in general, so the E46 doesn't particularly tickle me very well, but it's not a bad car. Anyways, what is it like to drive? It is decent. It is better than the 350Z. It's less slidey than the 350Z. It has flappy paddles for some reason. I don't really know why they went for an automatic version of the M3, but they did. That's the one they scanned, so fair enough. Yeah, it's a decent enough vehicle to drive. It's not particularly remarkable in any sense, and that's how most M3s do drive in Forza. They're usually decent enough cars, they're just not particularly remarkable. The E36 is a lot more slidey than the E46, but yeah, the 46 just, it isn't a particularly interesting car. It's reasonably quick in a straight line, 333 horsepower. Isn't that bad, especially for the class and the time that this vehicle came out. It does weigh a little bit, but it isn't a terrible car. It's just not it's a bit vanilla, really. Anyways, speaking of vanilla, although not really, because this car is very far from vanilla. This is the Chevrolet Corvette C6 ZR1, 638 horsepower, 3,350 pounds of weight. This is, of course, Cross's car from both Most Wanted and Carbon. In Carbon, it had a slightly different design. I basically just picked what the best design I could find was, and the best design happened to be a Most Wanted design, so that's the one I decided to go for. Anyways, of course, Corvette C6, I'm a fan. I do like the ZR1. This is actually the second most powerful vehicle here today, just missing out on the most powerful vehicle slot by about 3 horsepower. Yeah, we've had the ZR1 round before, and it's always been a pretty surprisingly good vehicle, and well, here today, it was great, although there is one caveat to that. It's great in the dry, in the wet it's also great, but you have to be careful. You have to be easy on the throttle, otherwise this thing will just throw you into a wall. It doesn't take any prisoners in the wet. It's still a very, very good car to drive if you can get it right. It's insanely quick. It's probably one of the fastest cars in a straight line here today, and around the corners it's also not bad either. It's a really good car, the C6. I do recommend you give it a go. Next up, we have the Audi R8 V10 Plus 2013 model, 542 horsepower, 3,682 pounds of weight. This is, of course, Darius's car from Carbon, although that was a Le Mans Quattro. A Le Mans concept car. This is the sort of production R8. It's the closest we can get, just like with the ZR1. Cross's Corvette wasn't a ZR1, but, you know, have to improvise a little bit. Anyways, Audi R8. We've had this go around the track a fair old few times as well, just like the R34, and it's a very good car to drive, this one. I do like it. I'm not a huge fan of the Audi R8 normally, but in sort of a driving perspective, it is a good car, I can't deny that. Of course, four-wheel drive supercar, big great Lamborghini V10. It does handle better than the Gallardo did. We had the Gallardo Superleggera. Of course, that was one of the first cars to go around the wet track. But this does definitely handle better than that vehicle did. It's a pretty darn solid supercar, actually, all in all. Just like, of course, the Gallardo, the Huracan, and the new R8. All those cars are solid choices if you want a supercar to drive. Yeah, solid car. Again, not my personal favourite when it comes to supercars. I've always found the R8 a little bit boring, but it's still a pretty good car nonetheless. Next up, Mitsubishi Lancer Evo 10, 305 horsepower, 3,395 pounds of weight. This is, of course, Rio's car from a Need for Speed Pro Street. A pretty cool design, actually, on the Evo. I do quite like it. So, we had the Subaru WRX STI go around not too long ago, and I was kind of curious to see how the Evo 10 would compare to the Subaru. Ultimately, this is a decent vehicle to drive. I would say this car is probably a little bit quicker in a straight line and a little bit worse through the corners, is sort of how I would evaluate the Evo. It is a good car, but it's not quite as good as the Impreza. It is a bit of a strange car to drive. It feels a little wallowy through the corners, sort of. You feel quite high up, which is a little bit strange. It's almost like driving a crossover vehicle, almost like you've got a high seating position and everything. It's a little bit weird. It's a little bit rolly on the suspension, but not too much. Of course, if you stuck race suspension in this, it would probably be fine. Yeah, the Evo 10 is a decent car to drive. Will it beat the Subaru? Well, I guess we'll find that out towards the end of the show. Of course, in real life, the Subaru did beat the Lancer, and that's why the Lancer sort of isn't made anymore. The Evo 10 is a bit of a controversial last generation of the vehicle. Some people like it, some people hate it. But personally, I quite like the Evo 10. Next up, Porsche 911 GT2 RS, 611 horsepower, 3,020 pounds of weight. This is the lightest vehicle here today. It's one of the most powerful. The 911 GT2 RS is a pretty darn insane car, so I'm really curious to see where this places on the leaderboard. It could be gunning towards the top, I will say that much. So the GT2 RS then, what is it like to drive? Well, in my notes I've put it down as a very big fast. This car is insanely quick. This is the quickest car in a straight line here today, no doubt about it. It's hugely quick. You know, it's rear wheel drive, rear engined, which means it gets a fantastic launch. It's got a decent amount of power, it doesn't weigh anything. It is a tricky car to drive, however. Again, like the Corvette, this takes no prisoners. However, even if you are careful, this car will occasionally just decide to throw you into a wall. It is a tricky car to drive. I couldn't really maximize the 911, unfortunately. It still is hugely quick, but I could just not push the car as much as I'd want to because it would just throw me out. Yeah, the GT2 though, it is phenomenally quick. I definitely recommend giving it a try and just experience it for its speed. Finally today, also, I forgot to mention, the 911 GT2 was Rose's car from Need for Speed Undercover, and this Lamborghini Reventon here, which is the final car today, 641 horsepower, 4,068 pounds of weight. This is I say it's from Hot Pursuit 2010. I believe it's made an appearance in most of the Criterion / Ghost Need for Speed games as well. Because it's pretty common as a police car in those games. Anyways, the Reventon, of course, this is just a rebodied Murcielago LP640. And, well, the Murcielagos in-game, the SV, they've never been particularly amazing to drive. They always suffer from a little bit of understeer. The Aventador really didn't have that. The Reventon kind of does. It's a little bit worse than the SV, I will say. It's still not a particularly bad vehicle to drive by any stretch of the imagination. It is very quick, it's got four-wheel drive, but it is a little bit on the understeery side. It is very quick though. Again, most powerful vehicle today. It's also the heaviest vehicle, but when you've got 641 horsepower, does that matter? No, not really. Yeah, the Reventon is a decent vehicle to drive. I'd probably still take the R8 if we're saying about the cars here today, but there you go. Anyways, onto the times, and the 911 GT2 goes into 4th place with a 119.057, beats a Celine S7 by 0.5 a second, beats a Murcielago F1 12C. That car is insanely quick, not quite at the top, it does lose out to the MC12, but that's still a ridiculously quick car. Moving down the board, Lamborghini Reventon goes into 12th with 121.236, which means it beats out a Dodge Viper, which is pretty decent. Audi R8 V10 Plus goes into 14th for 121.475, just misses out on the Viper, just beats a Ferrari F40 and a Lamborghini Gallardo, which is pretty decent. The Corvette C6 goes into 18th for 121.899. It beats out a GTR, and it just misses out on a Lotus 211 by a thousandth of a second. Yeah, that's a bit unfortunate for the Corvette, but still a very good lap time from it. Moving down once again, we find the Skyline R34 in 46 with 126.980, beats an NSX and loses out to a Cadillac CTS-V. That Cadillac is almost 100 PI higher than the Skyline, so that is a really good time set by the Skyline. Really, really impressive, actually. The E46 goes into 52nd with 128.039, beats out an R32 Skyline and a Subaru WRX, which is pretty decent. The Evo 10 finds itself in 56th with 128.935, misses out on beating the WRX STI, a little bit slower than a Delta S4, however it does beat a Shelby Cobra and a Mazda RX-7, which is a pretty solid lap time from the Evo 10, to be perfectly honest. And finally today, the Nissan 350Z, it just wasn't particularly great. It does go into 66th, however, with a 130.210. Loses out just fractionally to a BMW M1 and a Toyota Supra, but it does beat a Quattro, a Macan Turbo, a Porsche 930 Turbo. Decent time from the 350Z despite its issues. Anyways, friends, that is it for today's episode. Now, in the next episode, we're going to be taking a look at the slowest cars in Forza Motorsport 6. So join me for that very slow episode, because, of course, we need to populate the bottom of the leaderboard. So, yeah, thank you all very much for watching, friends. My name's been The Real Emile, and until next time, farewell.